He shattered military-grade restraints with his bare hands, 230 pounds of decorated Special Forces muscle, and he was tearing through reinforced steel like it was packing tape. Security guards pressed themselves flat against the corridor walls. A charge nurse was crying into her radio. 3 orderlies had already run. The psych team was 18 minutes out, and the only person moving toward the room was the hospital's newest nurse, a woman who'd been on the floor for less than 4 hours, who nobody had bothered to learn the name of yet. She wasn't running. She was walking like she'd done this before. Before we go any further, if stories like this are what you came here for, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we release new cinematic stories every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Drop a like if this already has your heart going, and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The Greyhound pulled into Calverton, Wyoming at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Nora Voss stepped off with one duffel bag, a backpack held together by a broken zipper and sheer stubbornness, and the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from not sleeping. It comes from starting over too many times in too many places. She was 34 years old. She had nursing credentials from 3 different states. She had a reference letter from a trauma surgeon in Billings who'd written, in slightly too careful language, that she was unconventional but results-oriented. What she did not have was anything resembling a welcome committee. The cab ride to Harwick General Medical Center took 11 minutes. The driver asked if she was visiting someone. She said no. He didn't ask anything else. Harwick General sat on the eastern edge of Calverton, like a building that had been dropped there by accident and never quite explained itself. 7 floors of beige concrete and fluorescent light, a helipad on the roof that saw maybe 6 landings a year, and a reputation in the region for being the nearest trauma center to 3 different military installations. That last part was the reason Nora had taken the job. She checked in at the HR window on the ground floor, got a badge photo taken by a man who did not once make eye contact, and was pointed toward the 3rd-floor nursing station where the night shift charge nurse, a compact woman in her late 40s named Dana Kessler, looked up from a medication reconciliation form and gave Nora the kind of look that said another transfer without saying a single word. "Voss?" Dana confirmed. "That's me." Dana scanned her badge, handed her a laminated orientation packet that was clearly several years old, Nora could tell because it still listed a pager number, and said, "You're on general medical tonight. We're short-staffed on the East Wing. Beds 12 through 22, plus overflow from the 2nd floor. One of our regulars called out sick, so you'll be covering his patients too." "How many?" 11. 12 if the admit from the ED clears. Nora looked at the packet and looked back at Dana. "Anything I should know going in?" Dana paused just long enough to mean something. "Room 18 is a complicated situation. The attending will brief you if anything changes. Until then, you observe protocol and you don't engage unless you're called in. Clear?" "Clear," Nora said, though she'd already made a mental note about room 18. The East Wing at 12:15 a.m. was the specific brand of quiet that hospitals get late at night. Not peaceful, just tired. The overhead lights ran a little dim on the overnight setting. Someone had left a half-eaten granola bar on top of the medication cart. A monitor somewhere down the hall was beeping a rhythm that nobody was responding to, which meant it had probably been beeping for a while and the staff had decided it wasn't critical. Nora did a lap of her assigned rooms first, the way she always did. Not because she was supposed to, but because she needed to know where things actually were versus where the paperwork said they were. She checked IV lines, looked at drip rates, noted which patients were awake and which were genuinely asleep versus medicated into something that only resembled sleep. She paused outside room 18. The door was partially closed. Through the gap, she could see the arrangement the staff had put together. The regular bed had been pushed against the far wall and replaced with a reinforced hospital unit she recognized immediately, the kind with lockable side rails and a frame that bolted to the floor. There was a camera mounted in the upper corner of the room, and the light on it was red, which meant it was recording. The man in the bed was large. Even lying down, even in a hospital gown, even with IV lines running into both arms, the frame of him was unmistakable. His forearms had the kind of definition that didn't come from a gym. It came from years of carrying weight over uneven ground. His face was turned toward the window, and in the bad light she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were loosely fisted against the sheets, even in whatever medicated state he was supposed to be in. She could also see that the restraint cuff on his left wrist had a stress fracture along one of its fasteners. She made a note to tell Dana. She moved on to the rest of her patients. At 1:30 a.m., she was updating charts on the computer at the nursing station when she heard it. Not a crash exactly, more like a sustained structural complaint. The sound a room makes when something inside it is experiencing serious force. Then an alarm, the kind that wasn't a medical alarm but a security alert, a flat two-tone that pulsed from the overhead panel. Then someone screaming, short and cut off. Nora was already moving before the second alert sounded. The hallway outside room 18 had gone from empty to chaotic in roughly 90 seconds. 2 security guards were pressed on either side of the doorframe, one of them on his radio, the other one holding his hand like he'd hit something solid with it. A nursing aide was backed against the opposite wall, eyes wide, saying nothing. Dana Kessler was 10 feet back, holding a phone, talking fast and low. Through the open door, Nora could see what had happened. The reinforced restraints, both of them, left and right, had been separated from the bed frame. Not picked, not slipped. Separated, the metal brackets bent outward at angles that didn't make physical sense unless you applied a sustained and specific kind of force. The patient, the man from room 18, was standing in the middle of the room, arms loose at his sides, breathing hard, staring at something that wasn't there. He wasn't looking at any of them. He wasn't looking at the door or the guards or the camera. He was looking at a fixed point approximately 6 inches above the window ledge, and his expression was the most concentrated thing Nora had seen on a human face in years. Not rage, not fear, something more precise than either of those. He was reacting to something none of them could see. Dana grabbed her arm. "Don't go in there." "What's his name?" Nora asked. "Voss, I'm telling you, Psych is on the way." "His name," Nora said. Dana pressed her lips together. "Sergeant Marcus Holt, decorated SOF. He's been in and out of acute episodes since admission 3 days ago. He's already put 2 people in the ED tonight." "What's his medication chart say?" "That is not your concern right now, but it is my concern," Nora said, "because the way he's standing, the way he's tracking that point on the wall, that's not a psychotic break. That's a tactical response. Someone trained that into him, and he's running a loop of it right now, which means he's not here with us at all." She looked at Dana directly. "Who changed his chart in the last 12 hours? Dana blinked. "That's a very specific question." "Yes," Nora said, "it is." She pulled her arm free and stepped into the doorway. One of the security guards grabbed for her shoulder, and she angled out from under it without breaking stride. Not aggressively, just efficiently, the way someone moves when they've had that maneuver done to them enough times to have developed a reflex. The guard said something sharp behind her but didn't follow. Inside the room, the air had that particular quality of a space where something physical and serious had just happened. The overturned tray table, the IV stand knocked sideways with the line still running, the bent bed rail sitting on the linoleum at an angle. Nora stopped just inside the door. She didn't move toward him. She didn't call his name. She stood still and she watched him, the way she'd been taught once, in a very different context, to watch someone who was operating on training and terror instead of conscious thought. His breathing was fast but rhythmic. His weight was distributed forward on the balls of his feet. His eyes were locked on that point above the window, and his hands were open now. She hadn't noticed that shift. Fingers spread, which in the sequence she recognized meant he'd just cleared a weapon check. Except there was no weapon. He was in a hospital gown, and his arms were marked with IV adhesive, and he was doing a weapon check for a rifle he hadn't held in however many months. She said quietly and without inflection, "You've got the high ground. North approach is covered." His head turned 2 degrees. She said it again, same tone, same pace. "High ground is yours. North is covered." He stopped tracking the window. His breathing changed, not immediately, not all at once, but the rhythm shifted. The pace slowed incrementally, the way it does when something overriding kicks in and the body starts to remember that it's safe, or at least safer. Nora stood where she was. She did not move toward him. She did not speak again. She just held the space. After 40 seconds, she counted them. His shoulders dropped approximately 2 inches. His weight shifted back from his toes to a more centered stance. His eyes moved to her face, and for the first time she could see him actually focusing on her. "There's no one on the North Ridge," he said. His voice was rough, thick, like it had been dragged across gravel, but it was lucid, present. "I know," she said. "You covered it already." He looked at his hands, then at the bent bed rail on the floor, then back at her. "Did I hurt someone?" "Two people are being looked at downstairs. I don't know their status yet." He closed his eyes for a moment. Just one moment. Then he sat down heavily on the edge of the damaged bed and put his head in his hands. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "You won't have to," she said, and she meant it even though she had no right to promise it yet. Dana Kessler grabbed her in the hallway the moment the security team had gone in to secure the room, and the grab was not gentle. "What was that?" Dana's voice was a controlled hiss, the kind that's only possible when someone is furious and professional at the same time. "Grounding technique," Nora said. "Combat applicable verbal de-escalation. He was running a patrol sequence, not a psychotic episode. There's a difference." "And you know this how?" Nora held her gaze for one beat too long. "I've seen it before." Dana stared at her. Something shifted in her expression. Not suspicion exactly, but a category adjustment, like she was quietly relocating Nora from one mental file to another. "His psych protocol was updated this afternoon," Nora said. "I want to see the order." "That goes through the attending." "Who's the attending?" "Dr. Raymond Croft. And he's not here tonight." "Then who countersigned the update?" Dana hesitated. That hesitation told Nora more than the answer would have. "I want to see that order," Nora said again. "And I want to see the pharmacy confirmation for whatever's scheduled for him in the next 6-hour window. You're 4 hours into your first shift at this hospital. And in those 4 hours, I just talked a 200-plus-pound Special Forces veteran down from a tactical dissociation episode without anyone getting hurt, so maybe give me the chart." Dana looked at her for a long time. Then she walked to the nursing station, pulled up the electronic chart on the secondary terminal, and stepped to the side. Nora read it. She read it twice. The PRN sedation order made sense, aggressive but defensible given his presentation. The IV fluid protocol was standard. The scheduled vitals check, the neuroassessment intervals, all of it was within the range of what you'd expect for a patient with his history. And then there was the medication scheduled for the 4 a.m. administration window. It had been added to his chart at 6:47 p.m. by a login under Dr. Raymond Croft's credentials. The drug was a cardiovascular agent. In isolation, in a patient with a specific cardiac condition that Marcus Holt's chart showed no history of, the dosage was unremarkable. In a patient without that condition, in a patient like Holt, whose cardiac function was repeatedly documented as normal across 3 separate intake assessments, that dose would trigger a cascade event that would look, on the monitors, like a sudden and tragic complication. It would look like his heart gave out. It would look like PTSD and years of physical strain and a series of unlucky circumstantial factors. It would look like exactly the kind of thing that happens sometimes, to veterans, in the night. Nora straightened up from the terminal. "When was Dr. Croft last physically in this building?" she asked. Dana frowned. "He was here until 5, maybe 5:30. So his credentials logged a new order at 6:47. Dana's frown deepened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone used his login. I'm saying that 4 a.m. order will kill that man." Nora kept her voice flat and her hands still. "I'm saying you need to flag it right now and get pharmacy on the phone. And if there's a medical director available, you need them too." Dana stared at the screen. Her face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession and settled on something pale and calculating. "If you're wrong about this," Dana said. "I know," Nora said. Dana picked up the phone. She was wrong about one thing. She'd assumed Dana would be an ally. At 2:45 a.m., Dr. Simon Vander, Harwick General's chief of medical operations, arrived on the 3rd floor in a suit jacket over hospital scrubs, which meant he'd been called from nearby, not from home. He was 60-something, with a head of silver hair that was aggressively maintained and the kind of deliberate calm that Nora had learned over years to distrust immediately. He listened to Dana's summary. He looked at the chart. He looked at Nora. "You're the new transfer nurse," he said. "Nora Voss." "Ms. Voss." He turned the screen to face her. "Walk me through your concern." She did, step by step. The dosage, the contraindication, the login timestamp versus Croft's recorded departure, the absence of any documented cardiac indication in Holt's chart that would justify the prescription. Vander listened with his hands folded and his expression polite. When she finished, he said, "Dr. Croft sometimes accesses the system remotely. At 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday to add a cardiovascular agent for a patient with no cardiac history. He may have reviewed additional labs that indicated a need. Those labs aren't in the chart. Dr. Croft's clinical judgment isn't required to be fully documented in real time." Nora looked at him. "You're not going to pull the order." "I'm going to review the matter with Dr. Croft in the morning," Vander said. "I'm going to note your concern in the incident log, and I'm going to recommend strongly that you focus on your assigned patients for the remainder of your shift. The 4 a.m. window is in 75 minutes. "Yes," Vander said. "It is." The silence between them was the kind that contains a great deal of information. "Your employment here is provisional," Vander said. "A standard 90-day trial period, as outlined in your contract. The hospital has the right to terminate during that period without cause." He smoothed the front of his jacket. "I'd hate for a misunderstanding to derail what I'm sure will be a productive placement." Dana was staring at her badge. The nursing aide who drifted over was staring at the wall. The message had been delivered clearly enough that it didn't need to be said directly. "Understood," Nora said. Vander left. Dana wouldn't look at her. Nora went back to her charts. At 3:10 a.m., she was pulled aside by a man she hadn't met yet, one of the overnight security staff, a broad guy named Earl, who'd been on the floor earlier. He leaned close enough that she could tell he'd had coffee recently. "Dr. Vander called down," Earl said. "You're to collect your things and check out at the ground floor HR window. Your badge will be deactivated at 3:30. Nora looked at him. "I was just spoken to 25 minutes ago." "Yes, ma'am." He said provisional employment. "Yes, ma'am." And he made a call. "I'm just relaying the message." She thought about arguing. She thought about calling the state nursing board's overnight line, about raising enough noise that someone would have to pay attention. She thought about the speed with which Vander had moved and what that speed implied. Then she thought about the 4 a.m. window, 45 minutes out. "I'll go get my things," she said. Earl nodded, visibly relieved. Nora collected her backpack from the locker bay. She swiped out through the fire door at the east stairwell, which opened onto a service corridor that ran along the back of the building. She knew the corridor layout because she'd memorized the floor plan during the orientation packet review. It was a habit, knowing exits, knowing alternate routes. She'd had that habit for a long time. The service corridor connected to the linen supply wing, which had its own elevator, which was not staffed overnight. From there, it was 60 feet to the housekeeping access point on the 3rd floor. She was back inside room 18 at 3:19 a.m. Marcus Holt was awake. He looked at her the way people look at things that don't entirely make sense. "You're back," he said. "I'm back. I heard Earl talking in the hall." He shifted against the damaged bed, wincing. "You got fired." "Technically, I resigned by declining to leave." His eyes were clearer than they'd been at 1:30, and that was part of what bothered her. Whatever they'd been running through his IV was wearing off, and the 4 a.m. medication would hit a system that was progressively less suppressed. It would be more pronounced, less likely to look accidental. She looked at the IV setup, at the medication port, at the scheduled administration times printed on the hanging bag. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to believe me even though you have no particular reason to yet." Holt looked at her steadily. "Talk." "Someone added a drug to your 4 a.m. order. Not your doctor, not anyone who documented a clinical reason. The dose is wrong for someone with your cardiac history, which is to say you have no cardiac history. And if it hits your system at the concentration scheduled, your heart will stop and it will look like it was due to complications from your existing condition." He was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me someone in this hospital is trying to kill me?" "Yes." He thought about this with a kind of measured stillness that told her he'd received bad information in high-stakes situations before and had developed a process for it. "Why are you telling me?" he said. "Because I can't stop the order from here. I don't have system access anymore. The only thing I can do is keep it from reaching you, and that means being in this room when it comes." "And you don't know me?" "No," she said, "and you got fired for this." Apparently, he looked at her for a long time. "Army?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Once." "What unit?" "I was attached to Special Operations as a combat medic. I can't tell you more than that. I'm aware that sounds like exactly what someone would say if they were lying, and I can't do anything about that." Holt's jaw tightened. The evaluation behind his eyes was the kind she recognized. Not suspicion exactly, but the specific calculation of a person who has learned to read people quickly in situations where being wrong is expensive. "The 4 a.m. med," he said. "What drug?" She told him. She told him the dosage. She told him the contraindication. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds, and when he opened them, something had settled in his expression. "I know what that dose does," he said. "I've seen it." "I know," she said. "All right," he said. "So what's your plan?" She was about to answer when the handle of the room door moved. Not a nurse's entry, which was always brisk, not a security check, which was always announced with the keycard beep. A slow, deliberate turn, the kind someone does when they want to know if the room is being watched before they commit to entering. Nora stepped back against the wall beside the door, out of the line of sight from the hall window, and she put one hand on the IV stand. The door swung open. 2 people in nursing scrubs entered. Nora didn't recognize either of them. The taller one was carrying a medication tray. The shorter one went immediately for the IV port on Holt's line without saying a word, without checking his armband, without performing a single one of the standard steps that every real nurse does on every medication administration, because skipping them is how fatal errors happen. Nora said, "Stop." They both looked at her. The shorter one's hand was already on the port. Holt moved first. Holt moved faster than anyone in a hospital gown with 2 IV lines had any right to move. He came off the bed sideways, leading with his left shoulder, and hit the shorter one, the one with the hand already on the port, before the person had time to register that a 200-pound patient was in motion. The medication tray went sideways. The syringe the shorter one had been holding clattered across the linoleum and came to rest against the far wall. Nora was already moving on the taller one. She didn't hit them. She planted her shoulder against the door, blocking the exit, and grabbed the tray from their hands with both of hers, which forced the person to either fight her for it or let go. They let go, which told her something. A real nurse in a real emergency holds onto the tray because the medication matters. This person's priority was the exit. Holt had the shorter one against the wall with one forearm across their chest, which was impressive and also visibly costing him. His legs were shaking. The IV lines were pulling taut, and his breathing had gone ragged in a way that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with whatever was already in his system, slowing his cardiovascular response. "Don't," he said to the person against the wall. One word. It landed like a door closing. Nora looked at the taller one. Up close, the scrubs were wrong. Not the Harwick General charcoal gray that every staff member on this floor wore, but a slightly different shade, more blue-toned. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd spent the last 3 hours cataloging the color of every uniform on this floor, because it was a habit, and habits were what kept you operational when everything else went sideways. "Badge," she said. The taller one looked at her. "Show me your badge." The badge was clipped at the waist, turned inward. When she reached for it, the person shoved her. Not hard, not trained hard, but enough to create a gap, and they went through the door before she could recover her footing. She heard them hit the corridor running, a retreating sound that faded fast. Holt's arm was still across the shorter one's chest. "Let them go," Nora said. "You're going to pull the line out of your arm." He stepped back. The shorter one, younger than she'd thought, mid-20s, wide-eyed now in a way that looked genuine rather than calculated, bolted through the same door at something close to a sprint. The room went quiet. Nora picked up the syringe from the floor without touching the plunger and set it on the overturned tray. She looked at Holt. He was standing with one hand braced against the wall, head down, breathing through his nose in the deliberate way of someone managing pain or dizziness or both. Sit down before you pull that line, she said. He sat, not gracefully. He dropped onto the edge of the bed and stayed there, elbows on knees, and for a moment he just breathed. That wasn't the regular nursing staff, he said. No. So we've got a problem. We've had a problem, she said. It just got more confirmed. She was already thinking about the syringe. If she could get it to a lab, any lab, a hospital lab, an outside facility, anything with a mass spectrometer, she could confirm the compound. She could put a name to what had been intended for his IV port. Without that, what she had was a suspicious order in a chart and two people in wrong-colored scrubs who were now somewhere in the hospital or outside it. Without physical evidence, what she had was a fired nurse's account of an attempted murder, which was worth approximately nothing to the people she'd need to convince. She found a specimen bag in the room's supply drawer. They kept them stocked for urine collection. And she dropped the syringe into it, sealed it, and put it in the front pocket of her backpack. She was aware this was technically removing potential evidence from a scene. She was also aware that leaving it here meant it would disappear before morning. "How's your arm?" she asked. "I'll live." He looked at the IV port. "What's still running?" She checked the bag. "Saline. Nothing flagged in this one." "Can you take it out?" "I can disconnect the line from the port. Leave the port in for now. If you need fluids later." "Take it out," he said. She pulled the line and covered the port with a cap. He watched her hands while she worked, the way someone watches who's assessing competence rather than just passing the time. "You said you were attached to special operations," he said. "I did. I've worked with a few medics out of that pipeline. You don't end up in a civilian hospital in Wyoming by accident." "No," she said. "You don't." He let that sit. He wasn't pushing for the rest of it, which she noted. He was giving her room to keep her own information, which was an unusual courtesy, and she respected it. "Someone used your doctor's login to put that order in," she said. "Someone with access to the hospital's system from outside the building. That's not a disgruntled pharmacist. That's organized." "How organized?" "I don't know yet. But the two people who just left this room weren't acting on their own initiative. And they came prepared, and they left when things went wrong rather than escalating, which means they have other options, and they'll consider their next move." She zipped her backpack. "Which means we don't have a lot of time to stay in this room." He looked at her. "You're suggesting we leave?" "I'm suggesting you are in a building where at least two unidentified people just tried to put something fatal into your IV. The chief of medical operations fired me for raising the concern, and the physical evidence in this room will be cleaned up before the morning shift if we're not here to stop it." She looked back at him. "So yes." He was quiet for about 4 seconds. "I can barely walk a straight line." "I know. My legs are going." "I know. The drug they've been running through your IV since admission, it's not a standard PTSD sedation protocol. It's a muscle suppressant stacked on top of a mild cardiovascular depressor. You're not in as bad shape as they made you feel, but you're not at full capacity either." He stared at her. "You figured that out from looking at the chart." "From looking at the chart and knowing what the combination does." "Which you know because I've had to manage that protocol in the field," she said, and left it there. Another pause. He was doing the calculation again. She could see it in his face, the way he was weighing the information against the source, the urgency against the risk of trusting someone he didn't know, in a situation where the wrong call had a very definitive consequence. "There's a fire exit at the end of the service corridor," she said. "It bypasses the main lobby. If we go now, before whoever just left this room reports back and the next response gets organized, we have a window. And after that, I know someone I can call." "Your military contact." "Yes? Anyone else?" "Not tonight," she said honestly. He looked at the door, then at the room, then at his hands, still carrying traces of whatever residue the restraint metal had left on them when he broke through it. She watched him register that, the aftermath of what his body had done in a state he hadn't controlled, and the evidence of it still sitting on his palms. "Give me 2 minutes," he said. She gave him 2 minutes. He got himself to standing, tested his weight, found his balance with the particular stubbornness of someone who has been trained to keep moving through worse, He wasn't graceful about it. He knocked his shoulder against the IV stand on his way past and swore quietly, and kept moving. She held the door. The service corridor was empty. Their footsteps sounded too loud, and she couldn't do anything about it. Holt moved slower than either of them wanted, but he moved steadily, one hand trailing the wall for reference, eyes tracking the corridor the way she recognized. Grid pattern, corners first, then midline. Training doesn't take a sick leave. Even with his system compromised and his balance unreliable, he was performing a threat assessment of every 8 feet of beige utility hallway they passed through. "There's a camera at the junction," she said quietly. "I saw it." "We'll be on it." "Yep." "I wanted to give you the information." "Yep," he said again. "Noted. Still moving." The fire exit at the northeast corner of the building had a push bar and an alarm that was supposed to trigger when opened. The green indicator light above it told her the alarm was armed. She looked at it for a moment. Holt reached past her, popped the panel below the indicator with his thumb, found the bypass wire by feel, and grounded it against the door frame. The light stayed green, but the trigger circuit was dead. She looked at him. "I've opened a few doors," he said. They went through. The air outside was cold and sharp and smelled like pine and diesel from the service drive. The hospital's east side faced a slope of scrub brush and chain link that ran down toward what she thought was a secondary road, and she was right. There was a road, 2 lanes, unlit, running parallel to the hospital's rear perimeter. They moved along the fence line, staying in the shadow of the building's overhang, until the angle cleared the cameras she'd counted on the exterior during her approach 4 hours ago. That felt like a different time zone now. Everything before 1:30 a.m. felt like it had happened to a slightly less informed version of herself. She got her phone out. The contact she needed was listed under a name that wasn't a name, a 2-letter abbreviation that she hadn't dialed in 14 months. She stared at it for a moment. Once she made this call, things would move in ways she couldn't fully predict or control. That was true of a lot of decisions she'd made, and she'd made them anyway. She dialed. 3 rings. Then a voice, rough with sleep but sharpening fast the way people sharpen who are trained to come online quickly. "Who is this?" "It's Voss." A pause. Not a long one. "Nora Voss." "Yes." "It's 3:45 in the morning." "I'm aware. I need a favor, and I need you to not ask me certain things." Another pause, this one with a different texture. The pause of someone who knew her well enough to know that certain things meant things that were real and specific and probably complicated. "You in trouble?" "Not me specifically. There's a soldier. His name is Marcus Holt. I need you to run him. Full service record. Anything that's accessible without triggering a flag, and anything that looks like it was recently modified or sealed." Holt, Holt. Marcus, Staff Sergeant, Special Forces. Currently admitted to Harwick General in Calverton, Wyoming, or was until about 20 minutes ago. Was. We're outside. A longer pause this time. "Nora. I know. You pulled a patient out of a hospital. Someone tried to put a cardiac agent into his IV at a dose that would have stopped his heart. And when I flagged it, the chief medical officer fired me and sent 2 people in wrong-colored scrubs to do it manually. So yes, we're outside." The voice on the other end of the line said nothing for a moment. She could hear him moving, a chair, a drawer opening. "I need 20 minutes, he said. "We'll be at the secondary road behind the building's east side. Stay off your GPS." "Already off." The call ended. Holt had been listening, standing a few feet away in the dark with his arms crossed and his breath fogging in the cold air. "Old team?" he asked. "Old contact. Close enough." "You said you'd been out for a while." "Some contacts stay active." She pocketed the phone. "How are your legs?" "Present," he said. "Not happy about it." "There's a drainage culvert about 60 meters down the fence line. We can be out of sight lines from the building and still have the road visible." "Lead!" She led. He followed, and to his credit, he kept pace, though she could hear in his breathing what it was costing him. Whatever they'd been sedating him with had settled into his muscle tissue in a way that wasn't going to resolve in the next hour. She made a mental note: fluids, electrolytes, time. if they had time. The culvert was concrete and smelled like standing water and rust, and they crouched at the opening, and Nora watched the road and thought about the syringe in her bag and the medication order in the hospital chart and the two people in wrong-colored scrubs who were somewhere right now reporting back to someone about what had gone wrong. "Tell me something about the case," she said. Holt looked at her. "You don't have to, but we have 20 minutes and I'm thinking better when I'm talking." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 6 years ago, I was part of a team running an operation in a place I can't name. Intelligence we were given said clear passage, minimal contact risk. We hit heavy resistance from the second we were in country. Lost 3 guys in the first 90 minutes. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw did something. The intelligence was wrong. Wrong how? Wrong as in it described a situation that didn't exist, not outdated. Wrong. Someone had generated a scenario that didn't match what was on the ground and passed it up the chain as verified. And the 3 men. Sergeant Dara Whitfield, Corporal James Osei, Corporal Thomas Ruiz. He said their names with a flatness that was not absence of feeling. It was the flatness of someone who has said those names so many times they've had to make them endurable. We got a full review. Findings were that the intelligence failure was a systemic error, human factors, no individual accountability. Case closed. But you didn't think it was closed. I started asking questions about the intelligence chain. Where the assessment came from, who validated it, who signed off on the sourcing. His eyes were on the road. Things got complicated after that. Reassignments, medical flags on my record, evaluations that didn't match anything I'd been told in the field. He paused. Then a psychiatrist I'd seen twice submitted a report that said I was showing signs of operational stress disorder with paranoid ideation. Based on 2 visits. Nora said nothing. I ended up here because a VA referral came through for inpatient stabilization. I didn't fight it. I thought he stopped. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was reading things into it. He looked at her. Didn't expect the stabilization to include a midnight cardiac event. The silence between them was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Someone didn't want you asking questions, she said. Starting to think so. The intelligence failure, the case review that went nowhere, the psychiatric flags, and now a medication order that would have looked like a natural complication in a patient already categorized as unstable. She turned it over in her mind. Someone has been building a story around you for 6 years, and hospitalization was the last chapter. He looked at her for a long moment. That's a lot to organize. Yes, she said. It is. The vehicle that came down the secondary road at 4:17 a.m. was a dark gray pickup with Wyoming plates and no markings, which could have described 10,000 vehicles in the state and was exactly the point. It slowed at the culvert without stopping, and Nora stepped out from the shadow and the window came down. The man behind the wheel was in his mid-40s, heavy-set, with the kind of face that was designed to be unmemorable and had clearly been cultivated that way deliberately. He looked at Nora, then at Holt, then back at Nora. "You look terrible," he said to her. "Good morning, Warren. Get in." They got in. Warren drove without speaking for 8 minutes, which Nora appreciated. She sat in the back with Holt, who had his head back against the seat and his eyes closed, not sleeping. She could tell by his breathing, but conserving. Eventually, Warren said, "I pulled Marcus Holt." "And?" "Decorated service record, 3 tours, specialized in high-value target reconnaissance, which means his clearance level was substantial. Commendations. No disciplinary actions. Then about 6 years ago, his file gets interesting." "Interesting how?" "Medical flags? 3 separate fitness for duty reviews in 18 months, which is unusual for someone with his history. Then a period of reassignment to non-operational roles, which his record describes as voluntary, but which 3 of his former team members, in separate unconnected statements, by the way, describe as involuntary pressure." Warren paused. 2 of those team members have also had career complications in the last 6 years. Nora looked at Holt. His eyes were still closed. "What kind of complications?" she asked. "One was passed over for promotion 4 consecutive cycles and eventually separated. One had a security clearance downgraded without formal explanation. Warren's voice had gone careful the way it did when the information was moving into territory he was being precise about. Both of them, in the same 6-year window, were connected to the same operational review, the one Holt's been flagged under. The operation where 3 soldiers died. Yes, a pause. Nora, there's something else. Go ahead. The intelligence assessment for that operation, the one that was ruled a systemic error, I found a secondary reference to it in a procurement database. Not the assessment itself, just a reference number attached to a contract. What kind of contract? Defense Services contract, awarded 18 months before the operation. The company is called Ardent Meridian Solutions. They do intelligence support services, analysis, and sourcing. And 6 years ago, their contract was renewed, not competitively, through a sole source award, 2 weeks after the operational review concluded. The truck was quiet except for the road noise. Someone paid them to get the review buried, Nora said. It wasn't a question. I can't say that. What I can say is that the timeline is, who signed the sole source award? Warren didn't answer right away. She could see his hands on the wheel. Warren? A senior official in the Office of Defense Procurement. His name is Brigadier General Harlan Cross, and he's currently being considered for a confirmation hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee. Holt's eyes opened. The truck moved through the dark, and Nora looked out at the Wyoming highway rolling past and felt the particular heavy weight of information that once you have it, you can't unknow it, and you can't unfind it, and the people who need it to stay hidden know that too. He's not just a hospital patient, she said, more to herself than to anyone. Warren glanced in the rear view. No, he's the last living member of his team who's still asking questions and still credible enough to be taken seriously. The other 2 are sidelined. Holt's the one they couldn't neutralize through career channels. So they used the VA system to get him admitted, Nora said, used his legitimate PTSD history as cover, and the hospitalization was supposed to be permanent. Holt said from the back seat, very quietly, "This was never about my mental health." "No," Nora said, "it wasn't." He turned to look out the window and she saw something move across his face, not surprised because some part of him had known or suspected. Something else. The specific grief of a suspicion confirmed, which is never better than uncertainty, no matter how much you thought you wanted the answer. They drove another 3 miles in silence before Warren said, "There's a problem." "Of course there is. The syringe you pulled from the room, you need to get it tested independent of any hospital-affiliated lab. I can get you to a facility in Rawlins by morning, but the chain of custody is going to matter. If this goes where I think it goes, every piece of evidence needs to be unimpeachable." Understood. And Holt needs medical evaluation. Whatever they were running through his system, we need documentation of it. Also understood. And the 2 people who came into his room, they're going to report back to someone, and that someone is going to know the attempt failed, which means Holt is a loose end, and you're now also a loose end. And the people who organized a fake medication order inside a secure medical facility have resources. "Yes," she said. "I know. I want to help you, but I need you to understand what I can and can't do without triggering things I can't walk back." She understood. Warren had a job and a clearance and a life that was separate from whatever he was doing for her right now, and she wasn't going to pull him further into it than he'd voluntarily stepped. She'd never done that to anyone, and she wasn't going to start. "Get us to Rawlins," she said. "I'll figure out the next piece." He drove. Nora sat with the backpack in her lap, the syringe sealed in its specimen bag in the front pocket, and she thought about Harlan Cross and his confirmation hearing and the 3 soldiers whose names Marcus Holt had said with the flatness of someone who said them every day because forgetting wasn't something he'd permitted himself. Whitfield, Osei, Ruiz, 3 names that had been folded into a bureaucratic finding about systemic error and filed away and were supposed to stay there, silent and resolved, while the man responsible moved toward a Senate confirmation and a general officer's star. She thought about the hospital, about Dr. Vander in his carefully maintained silver hair, making a call that got her badge deactivated in 25 minutes. About the logged order at 6:47 p.m. under Croft's credentials, added by someone with remote access to the system who knew exactly what they were doing. About the two people in wrong-colored scrubs who had come into that room without checking an armband, without saying a word, with the syringe already prepared. She thought about how long this had been running, 6 years of documented effort to silence one soldier. That kind of sustained, organized pressure didn't come from one person acting alone. It came from a network, people at multiple levels, in multiple institutions, each doing a piece of the work, most of them probably not knowing the full shape of what they were participating in. And now that network knew the hospital piece had failed. Her phone, turned face down on her knee, lit up with a notification. She picked it up, a text from a number she didn't recognize. No area code visible, just 10 digits and a message. You have the syringe. You don't have the log access. Without both, you have nothing. Come back to the hospital, and this ends quietly. She stared at it. Holt leaned over and read it. His jaw went tight. They're monitoring your phone, Chet, he said. Or Warren's. She looked toward the front seat. Warren. I heard, he said. His voice was flat. I swept the truck before I left. It's not me. A pause. But if they're on your phone, they've been on it since you made the call. They know where we are. She thought about the road, the empty highway, the Wyoming dark on all sides. How far to the junction? She asked. 12 minutes. Are there other roads? Yes. Warren was already adjusting. She felt the truck slow, then take an earlier turn, the tires shifting from asphalt to a rougher surface, gravel or packed dirt. But Nora, if they have live location on your phone, she already had it out the window. The phone hit the shoulder of the road at 60 miles an hour and became someone else's problem. Holt watched her do it. He didn't say anything. Then he reached into the pocket of the sweatpants she'd grabbed for him from the haul cart on their way out. Standard issue from the hospital's patient supply closet, charcoal gray, 2 sizes too big. And he pulled out a phone that wasn't his personal device. A cheap one. Prepaid. She looked at it, then at him. Taken off one of the people who came into my room, he said. The shorter one dropped it when I put them against the wall. I picked it up after you got the door. He turned it over in his hands. Didn't know if it'd be useful. Seemed like the kind of decision to make first and evaluate later. She looked at him for a moment. You collected evidence while running a tactical response on a compromised cardiovascular system, she said. Old habit, he said, and held it out. The phone was locked. Standard numeric PIN. She thought about it for a moment, then turned to Warren. Can you get into this without bricking it? Depends on the model. He glanced back. Not while I'm driving. She held the phone and looked out at the darkness on either side of the road. Somewhere behind them, Harwick General was processing the failure of whatever plan had been set in motion. Someone was making calls. Someone was making decisions. And whoever had sent that text to her phone, whoever had access to her call logs and her location and the hospital's medication system all at the same time, was now working a new angle, and she didn't know yet what it was. But she had the syringe, and she had the phone, and she had Marcus Holt, who was sitting in the dark beside her with the prepaid device in his hand and 3 names in his chest that he'd been carrying for 6 years, and the expression of someone who had stopped asking whether this was real and started asking what happened next. The truck went through a junction, turned north, and the gravel road became asphalt again, and the speed increased and the Wyoming dark settled in around them, and Nora became aware, with a clarity that was almost physical, that the text had said without both, you have nothing. Which meant they knew she had the syringe. Which meant someone in that hospital had watched her put it in her bag. Which meant there had been a camera in room 18 that wasn't on the hospital's visible security grid. She turned that over twice, made sure it held, and set it aside. There was nothing to do about it right now, and dwelling on it wouldn't change the geometry of their situation. What mattered was what they had, and what they didn't have, and how much time they could reasonably assume before the people behind the text message made their next move. Warren drove north for another 20 minutes without speaking, which she appreciated. The truck smelled like coffee and old neoprene and the particular accumulated smell of a vehicle that saw a lot of early mornings. Outside, the Wyoming dark was starting to show its first gray edge along the eastern horizon. Not light yet, just the suggestion that light was still an option. Holt had the prepaid phone in both hands, turning it slowly. 4-digit PIN, he said. The shorter one, mid-20s, moves like they've had some training but not deep training. The way they went for the port before checking the armband. Task-focused but not experienced. Meaning they were told what to do, step by step. Probably not someone who's run this kind of operation before. He looked at the phone. People like that tend towards simple pins, birthdays, repeating numbers. You're going to try to guess it. I'm going to try 4 options before the lockout. He held the phone flat. If it's biometric backup, we might have a window. Or we brick it and lose whatever's on it. Yes? She looked at him. He looked back. This was the specific kind of decision that didn't have a clean answer, and both of them knew it. Try it, she said. He tried 1, 2, 3, 4 first, which she thought was optimistic but not wrong to check. Then 0, 0, 0, 0. Then a sequence she didn't see him enter, something with his thumbs moving quickly, and the phone unlocked. She stared at it. What was that? 2580, he said. Straight down the middle of the keypad. People who are in a hurry use it a lot. He turned the screen to face her. It's a burner. Only 3 apps. A call log with 1 number, a messaging app with 2 conversations, and a notes file. Open the notes first. The notes file had 4 entries. They were brief, formatted like instructions rather than thoughts. Room number, administration window, dosage confirmation, and a line that read, confirm and clear with a timestamp from 11 p.m. the previous evening. The timestamp was 2 hours before Nora had arrived for her shift. They'd planned the 4 a.m. window before she'd even walked through the door. Whatever happened in room 18 had been scheduled, organized, and confirmed before she existed as a variable. Open the messaging app, she said. 2 conversations. The first was with a contact labeled only as M, and consisted of the same confirmation language from the notes, back and forth, ending at 11:47 p.m. The second conversation was shorter. 3 messages, sent and received in the last 40 minutes, sent from this phone, to a contact labeled only as a string of numbers. The first sent message said, problem, target moved, nurse involved. The response, received 18 minutes later. How far? The last sent message 10 minutes after that, outside perimeter, not contained. Nora read them twice. Then she showed Warren in the rearview mirror. He said, they know he's mobile. They've known since roughly 40 minutes after we left the building, she said, and whoever M is, they're receiving updates from this phone, which means they're also aware. 2 separate contacts, Holt said. Operational handler and someone higher. The string of numbers is the handler. M is whoever M is. Someone who gets 3-word updates at 4 in the morning and responds in under 20 minutes, Nora said. That's not a middle manager, Warren said from the front seat. I need you to think about something. Go ahead. If they know he's mobile, and they know the hospital piece failed, the next logical move is to find where he goes, which means they're going to start working the obvious options. Hospital's in range. He needs medical support, so they'll flag any admissions. Law enforcement contacts if they have them, and anyone connected to either of you who might receive a call. He paused. I picked you up on a road they had GPS for until 8 minutes ago. I drive an unregistered vehicle, but I am not invisible. And if someone with the resources to remotely access a hospital's medication system wants to find a gray truck on Wyoming back roads at 4:30 in the morning, they have tools for that. You're telling us to get out of the truck, she said. I'm telling you that I can get you to a place, and then the place is safer without me attached to it, for both our sakes. He said it without apology, and she didn't resent it because it was accurate. There's a property outside Riverton I have access to, off-grid. The owner is someone I trust. You can work from there, and I can run the evidence to the Rollins facility from a different vehicle. The syringe. Give it to me. Chain of custody documentation I'll handle. I know the lab director. It'll be logged, time-stamped, and secured within 2 hours of drop-off, which means it's legally protected before business hours start and before anyone can make a phone call to an administrator who makes a phone call to someone else. He glanced back. That's the piece you need most right now. Physical evidence, clean chain, and independent lab. She thought about it. The syringe was the most tangible thing they had. More tangible than a locked medication order in a hospital system. More tangible than a text message sent to a phone she'd discarded. More tangible than a procurement database reference Warren had found through channels he wouldn't fully specify. She reached into the backpack and passed him the specimen bag. He took it without looking at it and placed it in the console. The property is 40 minutes out, he said. I'll drop you, take a different route to Rollins, and check in when it's logged. Communication? Not by phone. There's a radio set up at the property. Frequency I'll give you when we arrive. Holt, who had been listening to all of this with his head back against the seat, said, The call log on the burner. One number, multiple calls over the last week. Can you pull the carrier record on that number? Warren was quiet for a moment. Not quickly and not cleanly. But I know someone who can. He sighed, the specific sigh of someone adding another item to a list that was already too long. Add it to the list. The property outside Riverton was a working property in the loose sense. There was a structure that had been built as a hunting cabin and expanded over years into something that resembled a small house, with a generator shed, a water tank, and a communications antenna on the roof that was old enough to look like equipment decay, but functional enough to matter. The owner, whom Nora never met, had apparently trusted Warren enough to leave him a key in a magnetic box under the propane tank, and Warren apparently knew this without needing to explain how. He dropped them at 5:22 a.m. as the sky was beginning to move from gray to something paler. Radio's on the shelf above the sink, he said. There's food that's probably edible in the cabinet. Don't use the landline if there is one. He looked at Holt. You need anything medical? I need to know what was in my system. When I have the lab results, I'll relay them on the radio. 6 hours, maybe 8. He looked at Nora. You have what you need for now? She thought about what that meant. I have a stolen burner phone with 3 messages that don't prove anything on their own, and a soldier whose hospital discharge was unauthorized, and a procurement database reference that points at a senior military official and no system access, no institutional backing, and no legal standing to be here. She met his eyes. So no, Warren. But when has that been the situation? He almost smiled. 6 hours, he said. Stay off visible radio bands until I initiate. He drove away. The cabin was cold in the specific way of buildings that haven't been heated since autumn. Nora found the generator, got it running, and located a kerosene space heater that protested for 3 minutes and then produced warmth in a 6-foot radius. Holt sat in a wooden chair near it and said nothing while she inventoried the space. The radio setup was a field-grade unit, older model but maintained. Someone had cleaned it recently. There was no dust on the dials. She found the frequency reference card Warren had mentioned tucked under the base of the unit and memorized the numbers. She did not turn it on. Not yet. She found a first aid kit under the sink that was legitimately stocked. Not a decorative box with 2 bandages and some expired antiseptic, but a real kit with IV supplies, a blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter, and a range of medications that told her something deliberate about whoever maintained this property and what they expected it to be used for. She checked Holt's blood pressure. It was low, not critically, but low enough to confirm that whatever they'd been stacking in his IV had included something with a vasodepressive component. His pulse was slow and slightly irregular, the kind of rhythm that resolves on its own in a healthy cardiovascular system once the causative agent clears, but takes time. You need fluids, she said. I know. I have IV supplies here. Do it, he said, without drama. She ran a saline line into the port she'd capped before they left the hospital. He watched the ceiling while she worked, and she worked efficiently because she'd run field IVs in worse conditions than a wooden chair in a warm room, and after a moment he said, without inflecting it as a question, How long were you in? 8 years. Combat deployments? 4. The last 2 were attached to units I can't name in places that weren't officially acknowledged. He was quiet for a moment. I ran a mission 6 years ago, he said. We had a combat medic. She was killed in the first contact, 26 years old. Name was Petrov, Alicia Petrov. Nora looked at the IV line. I didn't know her, she said, but I know the cost of that job. Yeah. He shifted in the chair. The people who sent her in on bad intelligence, that cost means nothing to them. That's what I need people to understand. 3 soldiers and a medic died because someone gave us a deliberately falsified operational picture and then covered it up to protect a contract. That's what happened. And the findings said systemic error and everyone moved on. Not everyone, she said. He looked at her. No, not everyone. At 8:40 a.m., the burner phone that was still in Holt's possession did something unexpected. It rang, not a text, not a notification, a call from the string of numbers contact, the operational handler. Incoming, displaying on the screen, ringing with the particular insistence of a call that expects to be answered because it has always been answered before. They both looked at it. If we don't answer, Holt said, they know the phone is no longer with whoever they gave it to. They probably already know that. Or they don't. And one answer buys us information about how much they know. The phone rang again. Nora picked it up and answered it, said nothing, and kept her breathing controlled. A voice. Male, mid-range, the specific calibrated neutrality of someone who speaks to people in difficult situations professionally. We have a problem, the voice said. The situation at the hospital is unresolvable at the facility level. There are federal eyes moving toward the pharmaceutical records. This needs to go to containment protocol. A pause. Are you mobile? Nora said nothing. Another pause, longer this time, with a different quality. Who is this? The voice said. It was not a question. She ended the call. Holt said, Federal eyes on the pharmaceutical records. Someone triggered an external review, Warren, or someone Warren contacted, or... She stopped. Or the night staff at the hospital flagged the anomalies independently. Dana Kessler saw the chart. She saw what I pointed to. She's not involved in this. She's not the one who deactivated my badge. That was Vander. And there's a difference between a department chief doing someone's bidding and a charge nurse deciding on her own what she's willing to carry. You think Kessler made a call? I think Kessler is the kind of person who looks at a medication order with a wrong timestamp on a patient's chart and decides she'd rather make a call at 6 a.m. than find out she didn't. Nora set the phone down, which means there's movement we didn't initiate and don't fully control, which is good, and also means the other side is going to accelerate. Containment protocol, Holt said. What does that mean to you? It means moving the problem before the problem can be documented. In a military context, it means either neutralizing the target or extracting the principals who can be connected to the operation. She looked at him. In practical terms, it means whoever is above that handler is about to make a decision about whether to run or fight, and right now we're the thing they'd be running from. We're not a threat, he said. We have a syringe that might show a drug and a locked chart order and a procurement record that a good lawyer could argue 6 ways. We have a burner phone that just answered to an operational handler and a radio check coming from Warren in 4 hours with lab results. That's still not enough. I know, she said, which is why I need to get into the hospital's system. He looked at her. The log access, she said. That's what the text said. Without the syringe and the log access, we have nothing, which means the log access is the piece that closes it. Someone remotely accessed Croft's credentials at 6:47 p.m. That access came from somewhere, an IP, a device, a network that can be traced. If I can get into the audit trail on the hospital's medication management system, I can pull the originating access point. That becomes the link from the physical assassination attempt in room 18 to whoever authorized it. You can't access the hospital system without credentials. No. She was quiet for a moment. But I know someone who can get me in. Someone other than Warren. Yes. He looked at the radio. Do you trust them? She thought about it honestly. I trust their competence. The rest I'll manage. She didn't have a phone. She looked around the cabin and located the landline Warren had told them not to use. An old wall-mounted unit in the kitchen that had the dulled plastic look of something that had been installed in the 90s and never replaced. She thought about the instruction not to use it. She thought about the 4-hour window before Warren checked in and the timeline the voice on the burner had described. Then she picked it up and dialed a number from memory. It rang 8 times. Then a woman answered with a sound that was half word and half complaint. "It's Voss," Nora said. Silence. Then, "You have a lot of nerve calling a landline." "I know. I need remote access to a hospital's medication management system audit logs. Harwick General, Calverton, Wyoming. I need the access history for a specific chart entry logged at 1847 last night under Croft Raymond, M.D. attending." A longer silence. "You want me to do what?" "I know what I'm asking." "Do you? Because what you're describing is Lena." One word. The right word. The other person on the line went quiet. 3 soldiers died because someone falsified operational intelligence and covered it up with a contract extension, and 6 years of institutional pressure on the one man left who was asking questions. Last night they tried to kill him in a hospital bed. I have the syringe. I need the log. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This one had weight in it. "Give me the system architecture if you have it." "It's a regional center, probably running a mid-tier EHR platform. I can give you the administrator contact name, Vander, Simon, Chief of Medical Operations. His credentials will have super admin access." "You want me to use his credentials?" "I want you to use whatever gets me the audit trail." Another pause. 2 hours. "I need it faster." 90 minutes, Voss, and I'm already annoyed about it." The line went dead. She put the phone down and turned around, and Holt was watching her from the chair with the IV line running and his blood pressure slowly climbing back towards something acceptable, and the expression of someone recalibrating their picture of who they were in a room with. "Lena," he said, "former Signals Intelligence, currently, technically, retired." "Technically." "She gets bored," Nora said. He almost, not quite, but almost, smiled. Chet. The 90 minutes went the way 90 minutes goes, when you're waiting for something and you don't have anything you can productively do while you wait. Nora ate something from the cabinet, crackers and peanut butter and water from the tank that tasted like storage but was probably fine. She checked Holt's vitals at the 40-minute mark. His pressure was better. His rhythm had smoothed. His color was coming back in the particular incremental way it does when a body clears something it wasn't supposed to have in it. He slept for 30 minutes. Actually slept, not the medicated approximation. She could tell the difference. When he woke up, he drank a full bottle of water and asked for another without preamble, and drank half of that. "How long was I in the hospital?" he asked. "Your admission was 3 days ago, according to the chart." 3 days. He said it like he was measuring it against something. "I remember the intake. I remember signing paperwork. Then it's chunks, impressions." He looked at his hands. "I kept thinking I was somewhere else, and I knew I wasn't, and I still kept thinking it." "The medication they were using has a dissociative component at sustained doses," she said. "It's not a side effect. It's a feature. Keep the patient disoriented enough that anything he says reads as consistent with his documented psychiatric history." "Clever," he said. The word came out flat and very cold. "Yes." And if the injection at 4 a.m. had gone as planned, the whole admission would have looked like a tragic deterioration in a high-risk patient. He stared at nothing. "They planned for the restraint incident. That's why the medication made me—" "I didn't break those restraints because I was out of control. I broke them because my body was responding to something it was being fed. They needed an incident on record, concrete evidence of instability right before the terminal event." Nora thought about this. He was right. And the fact that he'd arrived there himself, clearly and logically, in the middle of everything, said something about the quality of his thinking under pressure. Even compromised, even still clearing the drugs from his system, he was putting it together faster than most people would have. "They manufactured the instability," she said, "and they had someone inside the hospital, so not just Vander, someone at the pharmaceutical or systems level who could execute the plan in real time. Vander didn't strike you as someone who makes those kinds of moves independently. No, he's a fixer. Someone told him what needed to happen, and he arranged the institutional cover. The system access, the personnel, those came from above him. Ardent Meridian, Holt said, or someone using them. Warren found the contract, but not the people. The people are what I need. She looked at the wall phone. Lena is going to give me the originating IP for that chart access. If it traces back to Ardent Meridian's infrastructure, we have a direct line from the attempted murder to the company, and from the company to the sole source contract, and from the contract to Cross. A chain. A chain. Every link documented, every link traceable, every link time-stamped. She paused. It's not nothing. It's still not enough to move someone like Cross. It's enough to start a conversation with someone who has subpoena power, she said. The wall phone rang. She had it before the second ring. Lena's voice, clipped and efficient. You were right about the EHR platform. Vander's admin credentials were active. The audit log for the chart entry at 1847 shows remote access originating from a dynamic IP that routes through a commercial VPN. The VPN exit node is in Denver. The VPN provider is registered to a shell company called Viridia Services LLC, incorporated in Delaware. Viridia Services, which is a wholly owned subsidiary, Lena continued, of a parent entity called Praxis Group International, also Delaware. And Praxis Group International's registered agent, a brief pause, is the same registered agent as Ardent Meridian Solutions. The room was very quiet. Same agent, Nora said. Same address, same agent, different name on the door. They're using Viridia as a cutout for digital operations. Anything that needs to happen through a screen goes through Viridia, which traces back to Praxis, which shares infrastructure with Ardent Meridian. But none of those links show up unless you pull all three registrations and compare the agent details. Lena paused again. This is not an amateur setup. No. Someone built this to be deniable. If you didn't have the specific chart entry to start from, you'd never find your way to Ardent Meridian through normal channels. Can you document everything you accessed? Time-stamped, sourced, complete. I'm already doing it. You'll want a secure transfer. Warren has a radio relay I can use, and she checked the time. 2 hours. That works? Voss? A pause. This is connected to something bigger than a hospital. You know that. I know. The people you're dealing with, they've done this before. This isn't a one-time improvised thing. The infrastructure is too clean. Viridia has been active for 4 years, Praxis for 6. She let that sit. Someone has been running these kinds of operations for 6 years. I know, Nora said again. Watch yourself. I will. She put the phone down. She turned to tell Holt. He was already watching her, and his face had the look of someone who has spent 6 years trying to explain a thing that nobody would listen to and just heard the first piece of actual confirmation that the thing was real. Ardent Meridian, he said, connected to the system access, through 2 shells but connected. She sat down across from him. Same company that got the sole source contract 2 weeks after the review that buried your operation. They killed Whitfield and Osai and Ruiz, he said, and then they got paid. The words sat in the cold air of the cabin like something solid. And they've been running operations since, she said. Viridia's been active 4 years, Praxis 6. Whatever Ardent Meridian is doing publicly, Praxis and Viridia are the infrastructure they use when they need to make problems disappear. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, we need to get this to someone who can act on it. Warren's relay in 2 hours. Not Warren. Someone was standing. Someone inside the system who can move faster than whoever is working the containment. He looked at her. The DoD Inspector General. I've been trying to get to them for 2 years and kept getting redirected. But if you walk in with a documented chain, the chart access, the shell company registrations, the procurement record, the lab results from the syringe, they have to open a formal inquiry. And a formal inquiry triggers protections. Subpoena power. Evidence holds. Chain of custody locks. We'd have to get to them directly, not through normal contact channels. I know a name, he said. A deputy investigator, Elaine Tran. She's been running parallel inquiries into defense procurement irregularities for 18 months. I never got to her directly, but I know she exists, and I know she's active. Nora thought about it. Direct contact with a DODIG investigator while they were sitting in an off-grid cabin in Wyoming with a stolen burner phone and a remote-accessed hospital chart would either be the thing that saved everything or the thing that exposed everything to the wrong people, depending entirely on who answered. When Warren checks in, she said, we get the lab results and Lena's documentation through the radio relay. Then we make the call. He nodded. Outside the cabin, somewhere in the middle distance, there was a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not the generator. A vehicle, running slow, on the gravel access road, and it was not Warren's truck. Warren's truck had a specific exhaust note she'd memorized on the drive here, and this was different, lower, heavier, the sound of something larger running at deliberate speed in low gear. Holt was on his feet before she'd finished processing it, IV line disconnecting in one clean pull, and he crossed to the window in 3 steps and looked out from the edge of the frame, not the center. Black SUV, he said very quietly. Moving slow, tinted windows. She was already at the cabinet on the other side of the room. How far out? 1/4 mile. Maybe less. No plates visible from this angle. The cabin had 1 primary door and 2 windows on the front and a back exit through the generator shed, which she'd noted on arrival because noting exits was the habit, and habits were what kept you alive. She pulled open the cabinet where she'd seen the first aid kit and looked at what else the property's owner kept on the lower shelf, and found, resting on a folded piece of canvas, a radio handset that matched the frequency card she'd memorized, and beside it, wrapped in a cloth, a handgun. She did not touch, and a box of ammunition she also did not touch, and a small laminated card with 3 handwritten numbers that she recognized as emergency frequency codes for a very specific kind of contact. She recognized them because she'd used those codes before, in a different life, and the person who maintained this property had used them too, which meant she and Warren went further back than she'd ever asked him about. She took the radio handset. Holt said, "It stopped." She crossed to the window. The SUV was at the end of the access road, engine still running, sitting still. "They're not coming in yet," he said. "No, they're waiting." "For what?" The answer came from behind the cabin. A second engine approaching from the opposite direction. A sound she felt through the floor before she heard it through the walls. "For the second vehicle," she said. Holt turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was the specific and unhurried expression of someone who has been in this situation before, who knows what it means and what it requires, and who has already accepted those terms. "Back exit," he said. "Generator shed, then 40 meters of open ground to the tree line," she said. "Open ground." "Yes." He looked at the window, then the door, then her. "Tell me you have a plan for the 40 meters," he said. She looked at the radio handset in her hand and thought about the frequency codes on the laminated card, and thought about what kind of person maintained an off-grid cabin with those codes on a shelf next to an emergency handset, and who that person knew, and whether those people could move faster than the 2 vehicles that had just bracketed them on a gravel road in Wyoming. She keyed the radio. 3 short bursts on the emergency frequency, then she waited. The radio hissed static, and she counted seconds the way she'd been trained to, not by feeling, but by number, because feeling made time elastic, and elastic time got people killed. Outside, the first SUV was still sitting at the end of the access road. She couldn't see the second vehicle from this angle, but she could still hear it, idling somewhere behind the generator shed, which meant the back exit was already compromised. Holt moved along the interior wall to the second window without being told to, checking the angle, reporting quietly. "Second vehicle is a dark sedan, parked crosswise on the utility track. 2 people visible outside it, standing, not moving. They're containing, not assaulting," she said. "Yet." "Yet," she agreed. The radio crackled. A voice, not Warren's, older, with the particular compression of someone speaking through a field handset in a noisy environment. "Frequency confirmed. Who's calling?" She gave the code. The response code came back correct inside 3 seconds, which meant whoever was on the other end had been near a radio and waiting for something, which raised its own questions, but not ones she had time for right now. "We have a location problem," she said. 2 vehicles, 2-man minimum each, bracketing a structure at the coordinates associated with this frequency. "We need an intercept window." A pause. Not long. Assets available. Time sensitive? Yes. How contained are you currently? For now. That changes if they decide to move. Hold position. Do not exit the structure. 40 minutes. She looked at Holt. He'd heard it. He shook his head slightly, not in disagreement, in the specific calculation of whether 40 minutes was achievable and what that assessment required. What's the closest point of cover from the back exit, he said. Tree line. 40 meters of open ground. If they move before the 40 minutes, then we move first and we take the open ground fast. I can run, he said. I'm telling you that up front. Whatever they had in my system, I can run. She believed him. She'd seen how he moved when he needed to, in the hospital room with 2 IV lines and a compromised cardiovascular system, and he'd been faster than he had any business being. The body remembers what it's been trained to do even when everything else is falling apart. That was either a mercy or a cruelty depending on the situation, and right now it was the former. They held. The waiting was the hardest part. It always was. She sat with the radio in her lap and watched the window from the edge of the frame and let her breathing stay controlled and thought about the chain of evidence and whether Lena's documentation had transferred before the vehicles arrived, and whether Warren was already at the Rollins lab, and whether any of the pieces they'd assembled in the last 6 hours were going to matter if the people outside this cabin decided that removing 2 loose ends was worth the additional exposure. Holt sat on the floor against the far wall, conserving, watching the opposite window. He'd taken the ammunition box from the shelf, but not the gun, which she noted. He was holding options without committing to them, which was the right call in a situation where the wrong escalation ended everything. At the 20-minute mark, the first SUV moved. Not toward the cabin. It reversed slowly down the access road, back to the junction, and stopped there. The engine stayed running. Repositioning, Holt said, or someone called them off. Why would someone call them off? If there's movement on the federal review that Kessler triggered, if someone above the operational handler decided that an incident at a third location with 2 additional bodies creates more exposure than a clean withdrawal, they're cutting their losses. Possibly, or they're pulling back to a better position and waiting for a different opportunity. She looked at the radio. Either way, the assets from this frequency will still come. And when they arrive, we're no longer 2 people in a cabin. We're a documented situation with witnesses and communications on record. He thought about this. Who's on the other end of that frequency, Nora? She'd been waiting for the question. People who move in the same spaces I moved in. They're not government in any official sense, but they're also not nothing. She paused. They've been watching Ardent Meridian for a while. He was quiet for a moment. How long is a while? Long enough that when I called those codes, the response came back in 3 seconds. He looked at the ceiling. So we've been operating inside someone else's operation this whole time? No. We've been operating independently, and we're now intersecting with something that was already in motion. That's different. She met his eyes. It's better for us. It means we're not alone in what we've built. It means the chain of evidence we have isn't isolated. It connects to something larger, and larger things are harder to make disappear. Or we become collateral in someone else's objective, he said. That's the risk, she said. She didn't dress it up. He nodded, accepting it, and went back to watching his window. The vehicles came at 37 minutes, not 1, not 2, but 3, approaching from the main road, moving without hesitation and without the deliberate slowness of the containment vehicles. Dark government plates, and she recognized the configuration because she'd ridden in that configuration before years ago, in circumstances that had also involved a great deal of things she couldn't fully control. 2 of the containment people from the sedans were still visible on the utility track. When the 3 incoming vehicles came around the slope and became visible from that angle, both of them made a decision with their feet and made it quickly. One got back in the sedan, one just walked away from the structure into the scrub, which was the specific motion of someone deciding very rapidly that their employer's problems were no longer their problems. The lead vehicle from the 3 stopped 20 feet from the cabin door. A woman got out. 50-ish, short-cropped gray hair, A jacket that was civilian cut, but worn the way people wear jackets when they're used to having gear under them. She looked at the cabin, then at the utility track where the sedan was now driving away, and the expression she made at that was the expression of someone filing information without reacting to it. She knocked on the cabin door twice. Nora opened it. The woman looked at her for a moment, then passed her at Holt, who was on his feet, which had apparently cost him something because he was holding the wall with one hand, but doing it in a way that was meant to look casual. "Voss?" the woman said. "Yes." "I'm Galloway. You built something faster than I expected." "We had good materials." Galloway almost smiled. "Your lab contact came through on the syringe. Results hit a secure channel 20 minutes ago. The compound was a modified cardiac glycoside at a concentration that would have produced ventricular fibrillation within 6 to 10 minutes of administration." She said it like she was reading a weather report, which Nora recognized as the professional mechanism for communicating things that would otherwise require a different kind of response. It would have looked like sudden cardiac event secondary to the documented stress condition. And it's documented. Clean chain. Clean chain. Your signals contact transferred the Viridia and Praxis documentation through an encrypted relay 45 minutes ago. That's also in hand. Galloway looked at Holt. "Sergeant." "Ma'am? You've been having a bad week." "Among others," he said. She turned back to the vehicles, gestured once, and two of the people who'd come with her started moving equipment from the second vehicle. Not weapons, communications gear, hard cases, a portable unit that Nora recognized as a field documentation station. "Here's where we are," Galloway said, coming inside, looking at the space with the practical eye of someone assessing a working environment. "We've had Ardent Meridian under passive surveillance for 14 months. We've been building a financial picture, contract irregularities, procurement anomalies, shell structure. What we didn't have was an operational event we could tie directly to their infrastructure in real time." She looked at Nora. "What you pulled in the last 6 hours is that event. The Viridia access to the hospital system, the shell company chain, the syringe, the burner phone communications. That is a live operational thread that connects directly to a physical assassination attempt on a decorated service member." "And to cross," Holt said. "And to cross," she confirmed. "The sole source contract is the bridge. We had it identified, but we needed something contemporaneous to give it active evidentiary weight. A contract from 6 years ago is a historical anomaly. A contract from 6 years ago whose infrastructure was used to access a hospital medication system last night is a conspiracy in progress." She said it flatly, without emphasis, because it didn't need emphasis. Deputy Investigator Tran at the DODIG has been read in. She's been waiting for this specific connection. Federal warrants are being drafted. Holt made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Galloway looked at him. "It moves today. All of it." He sat down, not because he was weak, Nora thought, but because some things require sitting down. What happened over the next 4 hours happened in the way that large institutional things happen when they finally move. Not cleanly, not smoothly, not without friction and argument and moments where the whole structure seemed to be held together by 3 phone calls and a shared urgency. But it happened. Galloway's team established a field communications link from the cabin. Tran's office connected via secure channel at 9:15 a.m., and Nora walked through everything she had. The medication order, the timestamp, the Viridia chain, the syringe compound, the burner phone messages. While a woman she'd never met asked precise, unhurried questions and made notes in the background. Holt added the operational history, the intelligence failure, the 6-year record of pressure applied to anyone who'd been connected to the review. At 10:40 a.m., Tran said, "We're going to need formal statements, both of you, on record, under oath, today." "We can do that," Nora said, "and I need to be clear about something." A pause. "What you've given us opens a formal investigation. That process has a structure and a timeline, and it does not move as fast as either of you would probably prefer. What I can tell you is that the warrant applications are written, and they are going to a federal judge this afternoon. The speed after that depends on what we find when we execute them." "Cross," Holt said. "Yes. His confirmation hearing is paused." Tran said it without decoration. The committee was informed this morning that new information relevant to his background review has been submitted for evaluation. That's the language. It stops the clock without signaling the substance. She paused again. He doesn't know yet what we have specifically. He knows something has moved, because things have been moving around him since early this morning. His attorney made 2 calls to the committee's general counsel before 8 a.m. He's running the timeline, Nora said. He's trying to. The warrant closes that option. Tran's voice was careful. I want to be honest with you both. A man at his level, with his connections, does not go quietly. The legal process is going to be contested, prolonged, and in some phases, ugly. What we have today is the beginning of that process, not the end of it. Holt said, Will it hold? The evidence is solid. The chain is documented. The physical evidence is in a certified lab with time-stamped intake. A beat. Yes, it will hold. He didn't say anything. Nora watched him and thought about what it meant to hear that after 6 years of being told there was nothing to find, that the review was conclusive, that the instability was his, that the questions were symptoms. He didn't look relieved. He looked tired in a way that only resolves with time, not with news. At 1:15 p.m., Warren came through on the radio. His voice was tight, which she recognized as Warren's version of alarmed. I'm at the Rollins facility. Nora, someone made a call to the lab director this morning. Administration-level request to expedite a sample under a different case number. The director flagged it and held the chain, but someone tried to reroute your syringe into a different evidence category. Who made the call? Traced to Harwick General's administrative office. Vander's name was used. Galloway, sitting at the field station 3 feet away, was already on a separate channel. It's handled, Galloway said. The lab director is cooperating with the federal intake process. The rerouting attempt is now itself evidence of obstruction. She said it without looking up. Vander just made our case stronger. Warren, through the radio, said, Copy that, in a tone that suggested he found Galloway's presence both reassuring and slightly unnerving, which was probably the appropriate response. The sample is locked, he said. Lab director had it transferred to federal custody 20 minutes ago. It's out of anyone's reach. Thank you, Warren. Don't thank me. Buy me coffee. An unreasonable amount of coffee. He clicked off. The federal warrants were executed at 3:30 p.m. Nora and Holt were in a DoD field office in Casper by then, having been transported by Galloway's team, and they heard the developments through Tran's deputy, a young man named Fisk, who got updates on his phone and relayed them in the specific terse shorthand of someone who'd learned not to editorialize. Harwick General Medical Center. Simon Vander arrested in his office at 3:47 p.m. He had his attorney on the phone when the agents came in, which told them he'd known something was coming and hadn't known how close. He was taken out through the main entrance, which meant the afternoon shift saw it, which meant by evening the entire hospital would know. Ardent Meridian Solutions. Federal agents arrived at their registered offices in Arlington at 4:02 p.m., with warrants covering records, servers, communications infrastructure, and the personal devices of 4 named executives. The building was secured. A lawyer appeared within 6 minutes, which was fast enough to suggest they'd had one on retainer specifically for this scenario, which was itself interesting. Harlan Cross. This one was different. Cross had not gone to his office that morning. His residence in Alexandria showed no activity by afternoon. His personal vehicle was tracked to Dulles Airport at 11:20 a.m., 2 hours after the committee had been informed that new background information was under review. He tried to run. The alert on his passport flagged him at the international terminal. He was detained at 4:55 p.m. at the gate of a flight to Lisbon with a carry-on bag containing 2 changes of clothes and $200,000 in bearer instruments, which was specific enough to be embarrassing and stupid enough to be human, because even people who plan meticulous 6-year conspiracies make desperate decisions when the walls finally close. Fisk relayed this last piece with slightly less of a poker face than the previous ones. Holt, sitting across from Nora at the field office table, heard it and looked at the surface of the table for a long moment. At Dulles, he said. Yes. He was going to just leave. Yes, He breathed out slowly. Whitfield was 28 years old. He had a daughter. She was 3 months old when he was killed. He set it to the table. Ose wanted to go to law school after his third tour. We used to argue about it. I told him lawyers didn't see enough of the world. He told me I was full of it. He stopped. Ruiz sent money home to his mother every month. Didn't matter where we were or what we were doing, every month. Nora didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would serve this moment better than silence. Cross was at Dulles, Holt said again, just letting it land. Tran came into the field office at 5:30 p.m. in person, which Nora hadn't expected. She was compact and precise, early 40s, with the look of someone who had been awake since before the warrants went out and was going to stay awake until everything was logged. She sat down across from them and put a tablet on the table. Cross is in custody, she said. He's been transferred to federal holding in D.C. His attorney is with him. She folded her hands. I want to give you both a realistic picture of what the next several months look like, because I think you've earned the honest version. Go ahead, Holt said. Cross will fight this. He has resources and connections and a legal team that is experienced with exactly this kind of federal case. The proceedings will be contested at every stage. What we have is strong. It's very strong, but strong cases take time. She looked at him directly. What I can tell you is that the evidence of the operation that killed your team members is now part of a formal federal inquiry. The intelligence falsification, the procurement connection, the cover-up. It's all opened and documented. His confirmation is finished. His position is finished. Whether he goes to prison and for how long depends on a process that is now fully out of anyone's hands except the courts. The soldiers, Holt said. Whitfield, Ose, Ruiz. Their families will be formally notified that the operational review has been reopened. The original finding will be vacated as part of the inquiry. Their records will reflect that the intelligence failure was not systemic error, but deliberate falsification by a contracted entity. She paused. They'll be informed before anything goes public. He nodded, once. And Nora, Tran said, turning. Your nursing license and your employment record are being reviewed at the state level as of this afternoon. The termination from Harwick General is flagged as part of the broader institutional review. Vander's personnel actions from last night are being examined in that context. I'm not worried about the license, Nora said. I know, but it matters for the record. What about the 2 people who came into room 18? Tran's expression shifted slightly. The shorter one. We have an identity from the hospital's exterior cameras and the abandoned SUV registration. A contractor, mid-level, connected to a Viridia subsidiary, in custody as of an hour ago. She paused. The taller one is still unlocated. Not perfect, but not nothing. At 7 p.m., Tran left to deal with the D.C. end of the warrant executions, and Fisk brought them food, sandwiches from somewhere, wrapped in paper, and 2 bottles of water. And Nora ate half of hers, and Holt ate all of his, which she took as a positive medical indicator. The field office was quiet in the early evening. Holt said, Your contact, Galloway. Yes. She knew about Ardent Meridian for 14 months and was waiting for an operational event to tie them to. Yes. She had a cabin with emergency frequency codes on a laminated card and an off-grid communication setup ready to go. Yes. He looked at her. You've been out for how long? 3 years from my last deployment, she said. Active service, 8 years. And you've been moving between hospitals. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, putting something together in the way that she recognized. The systematic assembly of inference from observed detail. She'd watched him do it with the medication order, with the shell company structure, with the operational timeline. He was doing it now with her. You weren't just moving between hospitals, he said. She looked at the table. No. You were, he paused, looking for something. Or waiting for something to present itself, she said. Hospitals near military installations, veterans with complicated histories, cases where the official record didn't match what the patient's body and behavior were telling you. She met his eyes. I found 3, before you, in 2 years. None of them had the documentation chain we needed. None of them had what you have: direct connection to a named operation, a named contractor, a named official. The silence stretched. "So I wasn't a coincidence," he said. "I didn't put you in that hospital," she said carefully. "I didn't know you existed before last night. But when I found you, when I saw the chart, when I saw what they'd set up, I knew what it was." She looked at him steadily. "And I knew what I could do about it." He thought about this for a long moment. "How many people know this is what you do?" he said. "Warren, Galloway, 2 others. Lena. Lena knows the part she was asked to do." He nodded slowly. "And this is over for you, this specific thing." "This specific thing, yes." She paused. "There are others." He looked at her with the expression of someone recategorizing something large. "There are other soldiers," she said. "Other cases where the record doesn't match. Other operations where the review went nowhere and the people responsible went on." She said it without drama, because it wasn't dramatic. It was just the shape of the thing she'd understood and decided to do something about. Ardent Meridian isn't the only company running this kind of operation. Cross isn't the only official with the right procurement access and the wrong ethics. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I want to help." She looked at him. When the medical piece is dealt with and the testimony is given and the legal process is underway." He met her eyes without flinching. "I have 10 years of operational knowledge and a clearance history that, once the record is corrected, is substantial. And I understand better than most what these situations look like from the inside." He paused. "I'm not asking to be recruited. I'm saying I want to help." She looked at him for a long time. "We'll see how the next few weeks go," she said. It wasn't a no. He knew it wasn't a no. Outside the field office window, Casper was running its early evening business. Lights coming on in the buildings across the street, traffic on the main road, the ordinary motion of people who hadn't spent the last 16 hours dismantling a 6-year conspiracy from an off-grid cabin in Wyoming. Nora watched the street and let herself feel, for approximately 30 seconds, the particular release of something held under tension for a long time. Then Fisk came back into the room. His face was wrong. Not bad wrong, not the face he'd made when something went sideways, but puzzled wrong, the face of someone who has received information that doesn't fit the current picture. "What?" Nora said. "Tran wants you on a call," he said. "Something came up in the Ardent Meridian document pull." "What kind of something?" He looked at Holt, then back at her. "There are files in their system," he said. "Current files. Active case management files." He paused. "The operation they ran against Sergeant Holt, it wasn't isolated. There are 17 other files with the same structure, same methodology. VA referral, inpatient placement, medication protocol, terminal event scheduled." He glanced at his phone. 17 other veterans, different hospitals, different states. Another pause. "The most recent one was opened 4 days ago." The room went very still. 4 days ago," Nora said. "The file is still active," Fisk said. "Whoever they put in the system 4 days ago, we don't know who, we don't know which hospital, is still in there right now." Nora was on her feet before Fisk finished the sentence. "The file," she said. "Does it have a name? A hospital? Anything?" Fisk looked at his phone. "Tran's team is pulling it now. The file structure uses case numbers, not names, same as the Holt file did. They're cross-referencing the case number against VA referral records to find the patient identity." "How long?" She said 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Nora looked at the window, at the Casper Street outside doing its ordinary evening thing, and thought about a person in a hospital bed somewhere in this country who had been filed under a case number and scheduled for a terminal event that would look like a natural complication, and who had no idea, and who might have 4 days left or might have 4 hours, because Ardent Meridian's timeline had just been disrupted in ways their operational people would be responding to right now. "The arrest," she said, turning to Fisk. "Cross, Vander, the Ardent Meridian executives, all of that went public in the last 2 hours." "Yes." "Which means whoever is running the active case knows their infrastructure is compromised. They know the methodology is exposed. She looked at Holt. What does an operation do when its methodology gets burned mid-execution? He said it immediately. It accelerates or aborts. If they abort, the patient is left in the system on a wrong medication protocol and nobody knows to look. If they accelerate, he said, the terminal event happens tonight. She turned back to Fisk. Tell Tran I need the name in 10 minutes, not 20. And I need the hospital's medication management system flagged for emergency review the moment we have an ID. Not a phone call to the administrator, a federal hold on the medication queue. Whatever legal mechanism covers that. Fisk was already on his phone, walking toward the door. Holt stood up from the table. You're not cleared for field activity, she said, not looking at him. I'm not asking for clearance. She looked at him then. He was standing straight, which she knew was costing him something, and his expression had the quality she'd first seen in room 18, not aggression, not recklessness, but the specific focused stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the logistics to catch up to it. Sit down, she said. I'm not leaving without the name. When I have the name, we'll figure out the rest. He sat down, not happily. It took 11 minutes. Tran came through on the secure channel herself, not through Fisk, which told Nora the information was sensitive enough that she wanted to control how it moved. The active case is a veteran named Doris Pratt, Tran said, 51 years old, Army Intelligence, retired. 2 tours. She was referred to Lakemont Veterans Medical Facility in Spokane, Washington 4 days ago under a VA mental health protocol, admitted for inpatient stabilization. Nora already had a map pulled on the field station tablet. Spokane, 900 miles, 2 hours by air if there was an air asset available. Medication status, she said. Lakemont's system shows a scheduled administration window at 10 p.m. tonight, Pacific time. Tran paused. That's 2 hours and 40 minutes from now. The same compound. Similar profile. Modified cardiac agent, contraindicated for her documented history. Another pause. We have agents moving to Lakemont now. Local FBI field office was contacted 8 minutes ago. But Nora, the medication order is in the system. The hospital's on-call administrator is not responding to the federal hold request. We're getting resistance at the facility level. There it was, the piece that made this real. Someone inside Lakemont is running the same role Vander ran, she said. We believe so. We don't have an identity yet. Pull every administrative login for Lakemont's medication system in the last 4 days, Nora said. Same audit trail process. Viridia access. Remote login with attending credentials. Timestamp outside normal working hours. It'll be there. We're on it. But the agents at Lakemont are 40 minutes out, and the hold request is being stonewalled at the facility level, and we have 2 hours 40 on the medication window. Tran's voice was controlled, but carrying something underneath it. If there's a person inside that facility who can reach this patient before the agents do and before the administration window, I know, Nora said. She looked at the tablet. Spokane. The map. The distance. Then she looked at Galloway, who had come into the field office sometime in the last 10 minutes, and was standing near the door listening to the call with the expression of someone who has already done the same calculation. Air asset, Nora said. 40 minutes to Spokane, Galloway said. We leave now. The flight was 43 minutes because the wind was wrong and the pilot didn't apologize for it. Nora sat in the back of a small government contractor aircraft with Galloway and 2 of Galloway's people, and a federal agent named Solis who was FBI and had the tense, organized energy of someone who'd been briefed on a moving target and was managing the gap between what they knew and what they needed to know. Holt was not on the plane. She'd told him to stay with Fisk, and he'd told her she could go to hell, and then he'd stayed with Fisk, which was the appropriate outcome, and they both knew it. Tran was in her ear through the flight, relaying updates in the compressed shorthand of someone managing multiple moving pieces simultaneously. The audit trail on Lakemont's medication system had been found. Remote login at 2:15 a.m. 2 days prior, using the attending physician's credentials, adding a scheduled administration order for 10 p.m. the following Wednesday, tonight. The originating IP traced to a Viridia exit node in Seattle. The administrator not responding to the federal hold had been identified. Deputy Operations Director, 3 years at the facility, hired through an HR consulting firm that was, after 40 minutes of document pulling, linked to a Praxis Group subsidiary. He'd been placed there. Not recruited. Placed 2 years before Pratt was ever a target, part of a longer architecture of operational readiness. The FBI agents on the ground at Lakemont were 20 minutes out when the plane landed. Nora was 12 minutes out. Galloway drove. Lakemont Veterans Medical Facility was larger than Harwick General, a proper campus with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, and it was fully staffed at 9:20 p.m. on a Wednesday, which meant there were people everywhere and movement everywhere, and no clean way to identify who was running the inside piece of the operation just by looking at who was moving wrong. Nora badged in at the main nursing station using temporary federal credentials Tran had pushed through 40 minutes ago, which was either impressively fast or a sign of how seriously the DODIG office was taking the next 80 minutes. The charge nurse on the inpatient unit, a heavy-set man named Greer, maybe 55, who had the weathered competence of someone who'd been doing this job since before the electronic health record existed, looked at her credentials and looked at her and said, "Federal hold." "Yes." "We got a call about it. Nobody higher up authorized anything." "Nobody higher up has the authority to override a federal medication hold," she said. "Where's Doris Pratt?" He took her. Room 214, East Building, 2nd floor, standard inpatient setup. The walk there was 90 seconds that felt like something longer. Doris Pratt was awake. That was the first thing. She was awake and sitting up in bed with a book open on her lap, and she looked at Nora the way you look at a stranger who comes into your room with too much urgency and legitimate credentials, and you're not sure yet whether to be concerned. She was 51, and she looked it, in the way that people look their age, when they've spent it doing hard things. Short gray-streaked hair, a scar across her left forearm that had the clean line of surgical repair. The eyes of someone who had spent a career reading situations. "Are you my nurse?" she said. "No," Nora said. "I'm the person making sure you don't have a medication event tonight." She crossed to the IV setup, looked at the hanging bag, looked at the administration port, looked at the scheduled dosing display on the bedside unit. "Have you had anything from this line in the last hour?" Pratt looked at the IV. "They added something about 40 minutes ago. Nurse I hadn't seen before." Nora went still. "What did they say it was?" "Didn't say. I asked, and they said it was ordered by my doctor." Nora pulled on a glove from the room's supply box and disconnected the IV line from the port in 2 moves and capped it. She held the bag up and looked at it. The bag itself was labeled saline, but the secondary line running into it, the piggyback port, had a syringe driver attached that she hadn't seen in the initial scan because it was positioned below the hanging hook, partially blocked by the monitor stand. She found it. She stopped it. She removed the syringe driver from the line and set it on the bedside table with the gloved hand and stood there for a moment. Greer from the doorway said, "What is that?" "Get a specimen bag," she said. "Don't touch it." Pratt looked at the syringe driver, then at Nora. The calculation that crossed her face was the calculation of an intelligence professional who has just received a piece of information and is assembling it into a picture that was not the picture she had before. "Someone tried to kill me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Nora said, "and now they didn't." Kit. The FBI agents arrived 19 minutes later, which meant they arrived after the immediate crisis and before the administrative chaos that followed, which was the worst possible timing for them and the best possible timing for Pratt. And Nora didn't apologize for the math. The deputy operations director, the Praxis-placed administrator, was located in his office in the administrative wing at 9:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the original medication window would have closed. He was on the phone when the agents came in. He ended the call when he saw them, which was documented by the agents and would later matter in ways he hadn't anticipated. He did not go quietly. He demanded his attorney, which was his right, and he questioned the jurisdiction, which was his right, And he told the lead agent that this was a misunderstanding that would be resolved at a level above anyone currently in the room, which turned out to be precisely the wrong thing to say to a federal agent executing a warrant in connection with a conspiracy that had already produced 3 deaths and 1 attempted murder in the last 24 hours. The facility director, the top administrator, not the deputy, arrived from home in 20 minutes, white-faced and already on the phone with the hospital's legal counsel, and Nora watched her absorb the situation in real time and make the correct institutional decision within about 4 minutes of understanding what she was looking at. She cooperated. She opened the records. She gave the federal agents everything they asked for. She suspended the deputy director's access credentials while standing in the hallway, and she asked Greer to assign a dedicated nurse to Pratt for the remainder of the night. It wasn't redemptive or heroic. It was just a person choosing correctly when the alternative became clear, which was its own kind of important. Nora sat with Pratt for 45 minutes while the federal activity moved around them. Pratt had questions and Nora answered them, the same way she'd answered Holt's questions in a dark room at 1:30 in the morning. Directly, without softening, because people who have been used as targets deserve the honest version of what happened to them. Pratt listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I've been asking questions," Pratt said, "about an operation from 8 years ago. Intelligence product that I signed off on was later used in a way I wasn't briefed on. People died. When I tried to trace the chain, I kept getting redirected." "I know," Nora said. "It's in your file." Ardent Meridian. "Connected to the product, yes. We're still building the full picture on your case." Pratt looked at the window. "I thought I was here because I was falling apart. They told me the review process, the pushback I was getting. They told me it was stress response, that I was reading things in. They needed you to believe that." "I almost did." She said it quietly, and there was something in it that Nora recognized. The specific cost of self-doubt that's been installed by someone else's deliberate effort. It's different from organic self-doubt. It has sharper edges and it takes longer to heal because part of the damage is the knowledge that you were made to doubt yourself on purpose. "You weren't wrong," Nora said. "Everything you were asking about was real, and it's open now." Pratt looked at her for a long moment. "You do this." "Sometimes. You move between facilities and you find people like me." Nora didn't answer directly. "I found what was happening to you. That's what mattered tonight." Pratt accepted that with the pragmatism of someone who understood why certain things didn't get said explicitly. "Thank you," she said. "Just that." Nora nodded. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple or satisfying in the way that stories sometimes make consequence look. They were depositions and formal statements and legal proceedings that moved at the pace of federal machinery, which is to say slowly and thoroughly and with a great deal of paper. Harlan Cross was indicted on 7 counts, including conspiracy, procurement fraud, obstruction of justice, and 3 counts connected to the deaths of Whitfield, Osei, and Ruiz under a federal statute that covered interference with military operations resulting in death. His attorney was excellent, and the proceedings were contested, and none of that changed the fundamental weight of what had been documented. His confirmation was formally withdrawn 2 days after his arrest. He resigned his commission 4 days after that, under pressure from the Secretary's office, which issued a statement so carefully worded it managed to say nothing specific while communicating everything necessary. The 4 Ardent Meridian executives arrested in Arlington faced a combined 19 federal charges. The company's contracts were suspended within a week of the raid pending investigation. 3 months later, the Department of Defense formally debarred Ardent Meridian from federal contracting, a decision that was publicly announced and covered by 2 major news organizations who had been quietly following the procurement irregularity angle for months and now had something to report. The debarment meant the company was finished in any practical sense, because a defense services company without defense contracts is a company in name only. Simon Vander pled guilty to 2 counts of obstruction and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud in connection with medical records, in exchange for cooperation. His cooperation was substantive. He named 3 people above him in the communication chain, 2 of whom were Ardent Meridian executives already in custody, and 1 of whom was a mid-level Pentagon official who had not yet been identified. That official was arrested 6 weeks into the proceedings on a Tuesday morning, which Nora learned about from a news notification on a replacement phone, sitting in the break room of a different hospital in a different state. The 17 files in Ardent Meridian's active case management system were opened, and each veteran was located. 15 were in hospital settings of various kinds. 2 had already been discharged, and those cases required a different kind of intervention: locating the individuals, informing them, connecting them to federal investigators. All 17 were ultimately identified and protected. All 17 had been targeted because they had, at some point, asked questions about operations where Ardent Meridian's intelligence product had been used and where the outcomes had been wrong. The operational review for the mission that killed Whitfield, Osei, and Ruiz was formally reopened by the Army Inspector General 3 weeks after Cross's indictment. The original finding of systemic error was vacated. New findings, issued 6 weeks after that, officially determined that the intelligence product used for the operation had been deliberately falsified by Ardent Meridian personnel under direction connected to an undisclosed financial interest in the operational outcome. The 3 soldiers were officially re-honored. Their families received formal notification from the Army, in person, before anything was publicly released, which had been trans-specific and non-negotiable requirement. The language in the notification was not bureaucratic. Someone had written it to be read by people who had been waiting 6 years for a real answer, and it read that way. Nora wasn't there for any of the ceremonies. She was not the kind of person those ceremonies were built around, and she didn't need to be. Holt's medical records were corrected. Every psychiatric flag, every fitness for duty notation, every carefully worded clinical observation that had been used to build the picture of an unstable veteran whose deterioration was natural and predictable. All of it was reviewed against the now documented evidence of deliberate pharmaceutical manipulation during his hospitalization, and all of it was removed from his official record. What remained was a service history that was, when stripped of the 6 years of manufactured noise around it, genuinely extraordinary. 3 tours, specialized reconnaissance, commendations that had been there all along, underneath everything that had been piled on top. The Army offered him a formal public recognition ceremony. He declined the public part and accepted the formal part, which took place in a room in D.C. with 12 people present and lasted 40 minutes, and which he later described to Nora as the weirdest 40 minutes of his life, which she thought was probably accurate given everything that had preceded it. His medical treatment was completed over 8 weeks. The cardiovascular residuals from the hospital's drug protocol resolved without permanent damage, which the cardiologist described as fortunate, and which Holt received with the specific expression of someone who does not find the word fortunate adequate to the situation, but is willing to accept it. He contacted the families of Whitfield, Osei, and Ruiz himself. He didn't ask anyone to help him do it, and he didn't tell anyone he was doing it until after. He visited Whitfield's daughter, who was now 6 years old and lived with her mother in Georgia. He didn't tell Nora what was said in that visit, and she didn't ask. Dana Kessler's call to the state nursing board at 5:30 in the morning had been logged and time-stamped and was entered into the federal record as the independent third-party flag that triggered the pharmaceutical review. Her statement corroborated Nora's account completely. She was not charged with anything and her employment was not affected, though the institutional review of Harwick General's administrative structure during the period of Vander's tenure was, by the accounts of people who reviewed it, deeply uncomfortable reading. She sent Nora a message through the state board contact system. 3 sentences. I should have backed you up in the hallway. I knew it was wrong when I walked away. I didn't, and I have to live with that. Nora replied. You made the call that mattered. That's the one that counts. She meant it. Not as absolution, that wasn't hers to give, but as an accurate statement of what had happened and what it had produced. People make the wrong decision, and then they make the right one. And the right one sometimes changes everything, and that's worth something even when it's not worth everything. The nursing board review of Nora's license took 6 weeks to complete. The determination was issued without fanfare. Her license was reinstated with a formal notation that the termination from Harwick General had been part of a criminal conspiracy and carried no professional weight. The board letter was 2 paragraphs and bureaucratically impersonal, and she read it once and filed it away. Warren took her to dinner when it came through. A diner outside Laramie, the kind with linoleum that had been there since the 80s, and coffee that had clearly been sitting since morning. He drank 3 cups of it without complaint, and they talked about things that weren't the case for an hour, which was the most normal conversation she'd had in months, and which she discovered she needed more than she'd realized. At the end of it, he put his coffee cup down and said, "Are you going to keep doing this?" She thought about it honestly. Yes. He nodded. He'd known the answer. He just needed her to say it out loud, she thought, because saying things out loud was how Warren processed the things he couldn't change. "Then I'll keep driving trucks at 4 in the morning," he said. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I will." He guessed. 3 months after Harwick General, Nora accepted a position at a veteran-focused care facility in northern Nevada. Not because she'd stopped moving, but because the facility served a population that she understood in ways she couldn't fully explain to a hiring committee and didn't try to. She was good at the job, not in a way that generated compliments or certificates or performance awards, in a way that the patients recognized and responded to, which was the only metric that had ever mattered to her. She noticed things. She asked questions when answers didn't match. She kept records that went beyond what the charting system required, in a personal log that she updated every night, a catalog of the small inconsistencies that most people in a clinical setting learn to accept as noise. Most of them were noise. Most of the time, a wrong medication timestamp was a wrong medication timestamp, and a staffing anomaly was a staffing anomaly, and nobody was being hurt on purpose by anybody. But sometimes, she was under no illusion about what she was doing or what it cost. She'd been fired from 4 facilities in 3 years, and she would probably be fired from more. She'd made enemies she'd never met and been dismissed by people who should have listened and told she was wrong about things she was right about, and none of that had changed what she found when she went looking. There was a version of this life that was easier. She'd thought about it plenty. A permanent position somewhere, consistent colleagues, a place she kept her furniture, the ordinary accumulation of a life that stays in one place long enough to mean something. She thought about it, and then she thought about Room 18, about a man in a hospital gown who had broken reinforced restraints with his bare hands because someone had spent 72 hours chemically manufacturing his worst memories, and about a woman in Spokane sitting up in bed with a book and a syringe driver running poison into her arm that she didn't know was there. She thought about 3 names that had been buried under a finding that said systemic error for 6 years while the people responsible kept going. The easier version would have to wait. Holt called her on a Thursday afternoon 4 months out. She was in the parking lot of the Nevada facility eating lunch in her car, which was the only place nobody needed her for 20 minutes, and she picked up on the second ring. "How are you?" he said. "Functional? You?" "Better than I should be, probably." A pause. "The formal review on my team's operation came out yesterday. Public record." "I saw it." "The families are doing something. A small ceremony for Whitfield, Osei, Ruiz. Private, not military. Just people who knew them." Another pause. "I wanted to tell you, in case you wanted to know." "Thank you," she said. "You're not going to come, are you?" "No." She said it without apology. "But tell me about it after." "I will." She could hear him thinking about whether to say the next thing, and then deciding to. "There's a case I've been looking at. Veteran, different branch, similar pattern, VA referral, psychiatric hold, history of asking inconvenient questions about an operation that got reviewed and closed." She looked at the windshield, at the Nevada afternoon light. "Where?" she said. "Colorado. I have a name, a facility, and a record that doesn't match the clinical picture in ways that a person with your specific experience would probably notice." She thought about her current caseload, the patients on her floor, the log she kept every night. "Send me what you have," she said. She heard the specific exhale of someone who has been carrying something and has just put part of it down. "Already sent," he said. She almost smiled. "You sent it before you called." "Old habit," he said. "Making decisions first and evaluating later." The afternoon light moved across the windshield. Somewhere inside the facility, her 20 minutes were almost up, and the people who needed her would need her again. And she would go back in and do the work and notice the things that needed noticing and carry whatever piece of this was hers to carry. That was the truth of it. Not a dramatic truth, not the kind that looks like anything from the outside. Just a person who had decided once that there were things worth not walking away from, and had kept deciding it every day since. Some people are given power and use it. Some people are given nothing and build something from the using of it. The difference between the two is not talent or luck or position. It is the decision made quietly and without applause to stay in the room when leaving would be easier. Nora Voss had made that decision in a hospital hallway at 1:30 in the morning, walking toward something everyone else was walking away from. She was still walking. She always would be.